Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think we're good to go. So I'm going to be reading from my textbooks. The first one I'm going to be reading from is the Formal Logic textbook. I have the camera plugged in. It's like disabled right now. Obviously, that's why you're just seeing the desktop screen. Obviously, you can hear me though, and I'm just going to simply be reading. But if I want to show you guys maybe something like from the book, maybe like a picture or an explanation, I'm just going to kind of wing it as I go. Then I might disable the camera for like a couple seconds just to show you guys and then turn it off or whatever, because obviously I'm just doing this with no cam. But the whole point is hopefully you will, sounded like I said y'all, improper grammar. Hopefully all of you will enjoy this, because obviously it's just simply reading, and I try to get a nicer little desktop background, because before I just had my basic Omen desktop background, so just something pretty maybe to look at or enjoy while you're listening to me. I could change it maybe later to another picture or two that they have, but it's just the Bing wallpaper thing. Excuse me if I'm about to cough. Okay. Not good considering I have to read. Okay. Okay, let's get started with the reading. So like I said, I'm reading Formal Logic first. Might switch over to Minority Studies. We'll see. Okay. So I'm reading this one section. It's called Recognizing Arguments. So how logical are you? Suppose a friend tells you that he believes life exists on other planets, and it's just a matter of time before someone proves it. You ask him why he believes this, and he replies, "This is my opinion, and I'm entitled to it. I've always held this view, and I have the right to think whatever I choose. You have your opinions, and I have mine. Yours are no better than mine. Has your friend given you an argument? Why or why not?" So not all passages contain arguments, because logic deals with arguments, and it's important to be able to distinguish passages that contain arguments from those that do not. In general, a passage contains an argument if it purports to prove something. If it does not do so, it does not contain an argument. If it purports to do something. Okay. In the previous section of this book, we learned that every argument has at least one premise and exactly one conclusion. The premise or premises set forth the alleged evidence or reasons, and the conclusion asserts what is claimed to follow from the alleged evidence or reasons. This definition of an argument expresses what is needed for a passage to contain an argument. So number one, at least one of the statements must claim to present evidence or reasons. Number two, there must be a claim that the alleged evidence supports and implies something, that is, a claim that something follows from the alleged evidence or reasons. It is not necessary that the premises present actual evidence or true reasons, nor that the premises actually support the conclusion, but at least the premises must claim to present evidence or reasons, and there must be a claim that the evidence or reasons support or imply something. Okay, so it kind of said this in the previous section. I'm assuming this means, like, it doesn't really matter if anything's true or false, essentially, in an argument, which may sound ridiculous in retrospect, but it can still be an argument per se on logic terms, not what you would typically think. The definition of an argument, let me read that just for the purposes so you guys understand what I'm referring to. In terms of logic, it's basically a group of statements, one or more of which the premises are claimed to provide support for or reasons to believe one of the others the conclusion. So yeah, that's why they're referencing kind of premises or conclusions. So, I mean, it can be essentially a poor argument per se by having a bunch of stuff be false, but it still constitutes being an argument. And then I'm guessing what they're trying to say here, but at least the premise was claimed to present evidence or reasons, and there must be a claim that the evidence or reasons support or imply something. It is not necessary that the premises present, okay, nor that the premises actually support the conclusion. See, and that one's probably going to twist me up or get me confused when I go to do the assignment later. So I guess it doesn't necessarily have to support the conclusion as long as there's some sort of evidence or reasons and some sort of claim per se. Doesn't mean, okay. So I'm thinking again more along the lines of perhaps like it being maybe false per se, or not lining up with the conclusion, but either way, it could still be constituted as an argument. We'll see. I'll keep reading. Maybe it'll explain it a bit better. Okay. Also, you should recognize that the second claim is not equitable with the intentions of the arguer. Equitable. Intentions are subjective and as such are usually not accessible to the evaluator. Rather, this claim is an objective feature of an argument grounded in its language or structure. Okay, that makes sense, because obviously you're not going to know exactly what the person's intention is when they're saying something to you, exactly like what they're trying to convey, because obviously, you're not inside their head. So in deciding whether a passage contains an argument, the claim that the alleged reasons or evidence supports or implies something is usually the more important of the two. The claim that the alleged reasons supports or implies something is usually the more important of the two. Such a claim can be either explicit or implicit. An explicit claim is usually asserted by premise or conclusion indicator words. Thus, since, because, hence, therefore, and so on. An example of this is the Ebola virus has yet to be eradicated, and it kills on average 50% of those it infects. Thus, Ebola remains a threat to human health. The word thus expresses the claim that something is being inferred to the passage is an argument. And kills on thus remains a threat. Okay. So it's kind of similar to, again, in the previous chapter that I did, it's reminding me of the conclusion, but it's not necessarily the conclusion. It feels like it's along those similar lines like I learned, but we'll see. I think this is going to trip me up with the previous chapter, because it's very much the claim is very much reminding me of what the conclusion is. But an implicit claim exists if there is an inferential relationship between the statements in a passage, but the passage contains no indicator words. See, this is very similar to the last chapter. Example, genetic modification of food is risky business. Genetic engineering can introduce unintended changes into the DNA of the food processing organism, and these changes can be toxic to the consumer. So the claim would be the genetic modification of food is risky business, is what I'm going to assume, but let's just see. I might be incorrect about this. I'm just guessing before I read their explanation. The inferential relationship between the first statement and the other two constitutes an implicit claim that evidence supports something. So we are justified in calling the passage an argument. The first statement is the conclusion. Okay, I was correct on this. And the other two are the premises. Okay, I was correct on this. And deciding whether there's a claim that evidence supports or implies something, keep an eye out for 1, the premise and conclusion indicator words, and 2, presence of an inferential relationship between the statements. In connection with these points, however, a word of caution is in order. First, the mere occurrence of an indicator word by no means guarantees the presence of an argument. For example, consider the following passages. See, okay, I'm just going to make this point. I did a homework assignment that was on the previous section, and it was just only in the previous section, but I feel like reading these next couple of sections, or at least up to this point, would have better explained some of the questions to a fair degree, because it further emphasizes and I feel like better explains than what it did in the chapter of like certain points that I maybe feel like I was kind of vaguely missing or wasn't fully like getting the emphasis on. See, because sometimes it takes like reading it again or having it be reworded in a more specific way where it feels like it emphasizes it better. I wish maybe he would have my professor had us keep reading further. He's chunking it up into small stuff, which is very kind of him, I think, to do this in part because he knows a lot of this is really difficult rather than doing it in one fell swoop chapter. But he added 2 more sections, so a little more than certainly last time. But yeah, I mean, just trying to get used to the pace of the class and everything. But we'll see how this keeps going because this is some stuff kind of mentioned from the last section. So, like I said, no having an indicator word necessarily does not guarantee the presence of an argument. So, for example, consider the following passages. Since evident, I completely said that wrong. Sorry. Since Edison invented the phonograph, there have been many technological innovations. Since Edison invented the phonograph, he deserves credit for a major technological innovation. So in the first one that I read, the word since is used in a temporal sense. It means from the time that. So the sentence that they're referring to is since Edison invented the phonograph, there have been many technological innovations. So refers to it as a temporal sense from the time that. Thus, the first passage is not an argument, and the second passage, since, is used in a logical sense, and so the passage is an argument. So the second sentence that would constitute as an argument is since Edison invented the phonograph, he deserves credit for a major technological innovation. And see, and to me, it kind of makes sense because I feel like if you want to put it like in a grammar maybe way, because I read a little bit ahead at one point, and this is how I kind of thought of it, is the sentence that's the logic sentence seems like it's separated as 2 like almost independent sentences with like a comma, like since Edison. Well, maybe not really. Don't take my word on that, because since kind of in the beginning is sort of a conjunction, but yeah, I guess you could still say that. I'm so used to conjunctions being in the second half of the sentence. But since Edison invented the phonograph, because Edison invented the phonograph is an independent sentence. Well, so is the first one. Okay. Never mind. Ignore what I'm saying. I'm sorry. I'm one of those teachers that tries to make a point and then says erases everything on the whiteboard. I don't know. It makes sense. So the first one's more like a time kind of thing, and then the other one is like proving like a point, kind of with the logic. Sorry if I'm making this terribly confusing. I think this class can be confusing a lot of times, and I tend to overthink things, but. And I'm doing this, talking like this because I'm trying to think about it out loud with you guys as I'm going along and reading it. If I reread stuff, that's why. I'm terribly sorry. I'm basically studying this as I'm teaching this to you guys. Or reading this to you guys, however you want to put it, but I just figured maybe you could learn something from it too, like me, so I thought I'd share it. The second cautionary point is that it is not always easy to detect the occurrence of an inferential relationship between the statements in a passage, and one may have to review a passage several times before making a decision. In reaching such a decision, one may find it helpful to mentally insert the word therefore before the various statements to see whether it makes sense to interpret one of them as following from the others. Even with this mental aid, however, the decision whether a passage contains an inferential relationship, as well as the decision about indicator words, often involves a heavy dose of interpretation. As a result, not everyone will agree about every passage. Sometimes the only answer possible is a conditional one. If this passage contains an argument, then these are the premises, and that is the conclusion. To assist in distinguishing passages that contain arguments from those that do not, let us now investigate some typical kinds of non-arguments. These include simple non-inferential passages, expository passages, illustrations, explanations, and conditional statements. So the next section is simple non-inferential passages. Simple non-inferential passages are unproblematic passages that lack a claim that anything is being proved. Such passages contain statements that could be premises or conclusions or both, but what is missing is a claim that any potential premise supports a conclusion, or that any potential conclusion is supported by, premises. Passages of this sort include warnings, pieces of advice, statements of belief or opinion. Loosely associated statements and reports. A warning is a form of expression that is intended to put someone on guard against a dangerous or detrimental situation. Examples of this would be, watch out that you don't slip on the ice. Whatever you do, never confide personal secrets to Blabbermouth Bob. If no evidence is proven to prove that such statements are true, then there is no argument. Okay. A piece of advice is a form of expression that makes a recommendation about some future decision or course of conduct. Examples of this are, you should keep a few things in mind before buying a used car. Test drive the car at varying speeds and conditions. Examine the oil in the crankcase. Ask to see service records, and if possible, have the engine and powertrain checked by a mechanic. Before accepting a job after class hours, I would suggest that you give careful consideration to your course load. Will you have sufficient time to prepare for classes and tests and the job? And will the job produce an excessive drain on your energies? As with warnings, if there is no evidence that is intended to prove anything, then there is no argument. A statement of belief or opinion is an expression about what happened. Let me reread that. I'm terribly sorry. A statement of belief or opinion is an expression about what someone happens to believe or think about something. Examples: we believe that our company must develop and produce outstanding products that will perform a great service or fulfill a need for our customers. We believe that our business must be run at an adequate profit and that the services and products we offer must be better than those offered by competitors. And it tells you basically where it's from. Robert D. Hay and Edmund R. Gray, Introduction to Social Responsibility. When I can read the latte menu through the hole in my server's earlobe, something seriously out of whack. What happened to an earring? Maybe two in each lobe. Now, any surface is game. Brow, lip, tongue, cheek, nose. I've adjusted to untied shoelaces and pants that make mooning irrelevant. But when it comes to piercings, I just can't budge. Deborah Darbeck, service with a smile and plenty of metal. Because neither, I had to reread that because I didn't process what that said. Because neither of these statements asserts any claim that a belief or opinion is supported by evidence or that it supports some conclusion. There is no argument. Loosely associated statements may be about the same general subject, but they lack a claim that one of them is proved by the others. Example: not to honor men of worth will keep the people from contention. Not to value goods that are hard to come by or will keep them from theft. Not to display what is desirable will keep them from being unsettled of mind. Lao Zhao, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. Lao Zhao, thoughts from the Tao Te Ching. Not to honor men of worth will keep them. Because there is no claim that any of these statements provides evidence or reasons for believing another, there is no argument for believing another. Like, I'm trying to interpret like they don't have a relationship. Well, I guess they do have a relationship with each other. Believing there is no claim that any of these statements provides evidence or reasons for believing another, there is no argument. If I'm remaining silent, it's just because I'm trying to interpret it myself. Loosely associated statements may be about the same general subject, but they lack a claim that one of them is proved by the others. Okay, so it is what I kind of thought. A report consists of a group of statements that convey information about some topic or event. Example: the period of 1648 to 1789 was one of competition among the primary monarchs of Europe. Wars among the great powers were frequent but limited. France made major efforts to become paramount, but the balance of power operated to block French expansion. Stephen L. Spielgill, World Politics in a New Era. These statements could serve as the premises of an argument, but because the author makes a claim that they support or imply anything, there is no argument. When the great powers were frequent but limited, France made major efforts to become paramount. Another type of report is the news report. Witnesses said they heard a loud crack before a balcony gave way at a popular night spot, dropping dozens of screaming people 14 feet. At least 80 people were injured at the Diamond Horseshoe Casino when they fell into broken glass and splintered wood. Investigators are waiting for an engineer's report on the deck's occupancy load. Newspaper clipping. Again, because the reporter makes no claim that these statements imply anything, there is no argument. One must be careful, though, with reports about arguments. The Air Force faces a serious shortage of experienced pilots in the years ahead because repeated overseas tours and the lure of high-paying jobs with commercial airlines are winning out over lucrative bonuses to stay in the service. This is a prominent Air Force official. Newspaper clipping. Properly speaking, this passage is not an argument because the author of the passage doesn't claim that anything is supported by evidence. Rather, the author reports the claim by the Air Force official that something is supported by evidence. Rather, the author reports the claim by the Air Force official that something is supported by evidence. If such passages are interpreted as containing arguments, it must be clear that the argument is not the author's, but one made by someone whom the author is reporting. Properly speaking, this passage is not an argument because the author of the passage does not claim that anything is supported by evidence. Rather, the author reports the claim by the Air Force official that something is supported by evidence. If such passages are interpreted as containing arguments, it must be made clear that the argument is not the author's, but one made by someone with whom the author is reporting. If such passages are interpreted as containing arguments, okay. So basically, in a nutshell, you just kind of what I was thinking maybe they would get along the lines of is that obviously it's not the author's argument himself. He's just simply reporting an argument somebody else gave, so you just have to be specific about that. Again, because so the passage itself necessarily wouldn't be an argument because as a whole, I mean, if you're just referring to just the author himself, he's not arguing anything. It would just be simply a report on somebody else's argument. Okay. And reports kind of make sense because they're solely just facts. They usually try to not make any sort of extra claims or whatever in there. I guess you could per se give an opinion in terms of reports, but okay. So, expository passages. An expository passage is a kind of discourse that begins with a topic sentence, followed by one or more sentences that develop the topic sentence. If the objective is not to prove the topic sentence, but only to expand it or elaborate it, then there's no argument. Examples. There are three familiar states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Solid objects ordinarily maintain their shape and volume regardless of their location. A liquid occupies a definite volume but assumes the shape of the occupied portion of its container. A gas maintains neither shape nor volume. It expands to fill completely whatever container it is in. John W. Hill and Doris K. Kolb, Chemistry for Changing Times, 7th edition. There's a stylized relation of artist to mass audience in the sports, especially in baseball. Each player develops a style of his own. The swagger as he steps to the plate, the unique wind-up a pitcher has, the clean swinging and hard-driving hits, the precision, quickness, and grace of infield and outfield, the sense of surplus power behind whatever is done. Max Lerner, America is a Civilization. And in each passage, the topic sentence is stated first, and the remaining sentences merely develop and flesh out this topic sentence. These passages are not arguments because they lack an inferential claim. However, expository passages differ from simple non-inferential passages such as warnings and pieces of advice in that many of them can also be taken as arguments. If the purpose of the subsequent sentences in the passage is not only to flesh out the topic sentence, but also to prove it, then the passage is an argument. Example: skin and the mucous membrane lining the respiratory and digestive tracts serve as mechanical barriers to entry by microbes. Oil gland secretions contain chemicals that weaken or kill bacteria on skin. The respiratory tract is lined by cells that sweep mucus and trap particles up into the throat, where they can be swallowed. The stomach has an acidic pH, which inhibits the growth of many types of bacteria. Sylvia S. Mader, Human Biology, 4th edition. In this passage, the topic sentence is stated first, and the purpose of the remaining sentences is not only to show how the skin and mucous membrane serve as barriers for microbes, but also to prove that they do this. Entry with all the searches so that we can. The respiratory tract is like. So since it's trying to prove this, thus the passage can be taken as both an expository passage and an argument. So it kind of seems like with the other ones that they're merely just stating facts, where this one is trying to prove it. Okay. So in deciding whether an expository passage should be interpreted as an argument, try to determine whether the purpose of the subsequent sentences in the passage is merely to develop the topic sentence or also to prove that it is true. In borderline cases, ask yourself whether the topic sentence makes a claim that everyone accepts or agrees with. If it does, the passage is probably not an argument. In real-life situations, authors rarely try to prove something is true when everyone already accepts it. However, if the topic sentence makes a claim that many people do not accept or have never thought about, then the purpose of the remaining sentences may be both to prove the topic sentence is true as well as to develop it. If this is so, the passage is an argument. Finally, even this procedure yields no definite answer. The only alternative may be to say that if the passage is taken as an argument, then the first statement is the conclusion and the others are the premises. So Ohlgren secretions contain chemicals that weaken or kill bacteria on skin, and then it gives some more examples. So skin and the mucous membrane, serves mechanobeer. Okay. So the next section is illustrations. An illustration is an expression involving one or more examples that is intended to show what something means. So an illustration is an expression involving one or more examples and is intended to show what something means or how it is done. Illustrations are often confused with arguments because many illustrations contain indicator words such as thus. Examples. Chemical elements as well as compounds could be represented by molecular formulas. Thus, oxygen is represented by O2, water by H2O, and sodium chloride by NaCl. A deciduous tree is any tree that loses its leaves during the winter. For example, maples are deciduous, and so are elms, poplars, hawthorns, and alders. The selections are not arguments because they make a claim that anything is being proved. In the first selection, the word thus indicates that something is done, namely how chemical elements and compounds can be represented by formulas. In the second, the examples cited are intended to illustrate the meaning of the word deciduous. It pines down the meaning by providing concrete instances. However, as with expository passages, many illustrations can be taken as arguments. Such arguments are often called arguments from example. Here's an instance of one. Although most forms of cancer, if untreated, can cause death, not all cancers are life-threatening. For example, basal cell carcinoma, the most common of all skin cancers, can produce disfigurement, but almost never results in death. In this passage, the example given is intended to prove the truth of not all cancers are life-threatening. Thus, this passage is best interpreted as an argument. When deciding whether an illustration should be interpreted as an argument, determine whether the passage merely shows that something is done, or what something means, or whether it also purports to prove something. Determine whether the passage merely shows how something is done, or what something means, or whether it also purports to prove something. In borderline cases, it helps to note whether the claim being illustrated is one that practically everyone accepts or agrees with. If it is, the passage is probably not an argument. Just like in the previous little area that we read. As already noted, in real life situations, authors rarely attempt to prove what everyone already accepts, but if the claim being illustrated is one that many people do not accept or have never thought about, then the passage may be interpreted as an argument. Thus, in reference to the first two examples we considered, most people are aware that elements and compounds can be expressed by formulas. Practically everyone knows that water is H2O, and most people have at least a vague idea of what a deciduous tree is, but they may not have ever considered whether some forms of cancers are not life-threatening. This is one of the reasons for evaluating the first two examples as mere illustrations, and the last one as an argument. Explanations. One of the most important kinds of non-argument is explanation. An explanation is an expression that purports to shed light on some event or phenomenon. The event or phenomenon in question is usually accepted as a matter of fact. Examples: the sky appears blue from the Earth's surface because light rays from the sun are scattered by particles in the atmosphere. Scattered by particles. I might take a break just to rest my eyes for a little bit, so I might come back. I'm just gonna mute the mic for now.